Thank you to this wonderful panel, Anne-Marie Campbell, EVP, U.S. Stores, The Home Depot. We've spent time together before. Yeah. Thasunda Duckett, who is the CEO, Consumer Banking, JP Chase. I predict you're going to be on the list very, very soon. An old dear friend, Mellody Hobson.
Am I old?
No. No. An inspiring friend of long-standing. President of Ariel Investments. We thought it would be different by now. This conversation comes from two things: a story which I just reported for the Most Powerful Women list, and the list itself, an extraordinary, wonderful document of female success. And yet, Anne-Marie, you are the only Caribbean American Black executive who's on the list this year. So I thought, and I'd like to encourage you all to participate in the conversation. I'll be throwing it open early so we can all talk together. And I'll start with the simplest and yet most challenging question, which is why? What is unique about Black women that means that their experience in corporate America is different than some other underrepresented groups?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, and it's a really honor to be here. I would say, first of all, that I'm around a ton of diverse, powerful women. And being the only one represented from the African American or Caribbean community, it's not really an honor for me, because I really do think that there's so many others that have the performance, they have the capability, but they have to get the opportunity. Right. And it is important for all of us, and I think a person like myself that's in a leadership role, responsible for the 2,000 Home Depot stores and 350,000 associates, that I help provide that opportunity. First of all, we are, as it was mentioned before, Black women are 8% of the population. And even if you look around the ranks of executive leaders, it's so much less. And I think it's important for us to really put our biases and stereotypes aside and really, evaluate everyone on a level playing field where everyone has the opportunity to rise. And I think we all have an important part to play in that. But I do think there are stereotypes and opportunities that limits us to move forward.
Speaking of stereotypes and opportunities, Thasunda, your story is unusual. Let's just start with where you are now and what you're actually in charge of, because it's one of the bigger P&Ls I've had a chance to wrangle lately.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of the Consumer Bank at JP Chase, and so what that means is the 5,200 branches, the 18,000 ATMs, Chase Private Client on the investment side, that's what I'm responsible for. So it's 40,000 employees, yeah. And prior to that role, I was the CEO of Auto. And so when you talk about opportunity, I think working at JP Chase, and you all know Jamie Dimon, I think he's very bold about diversity, and I think he's bold because it just means simply culture and talent. It's part of our culture, and it's about talent. And for me to have the opportunity to be in the auto division, an area that is predominantly male-dominated, older white men, and at the time I was younger, I wasn't even 40 years old, it really just says you need opportunity, but you also need to be in a culture where you can be heard, where you can be understood, and where you can be embraced. Because if you're given that opportunity and you don't have the culture, the minute you trip, you're gonna be rejected.
Absolutely.
And so I think culture matters for people like myself to be able to bring the technical acumen, which is just table stakes. Talent is table stakes. The cross-functional discipline is another level of diversity coming from different lines of business. But then the highest level of diversity is perspective. And when I can bring me to the table when you're leading a business, that's when you're really having a differentiator in leadership. And I think that's what diversity and inclusion really is all about.
Mellody, let's bring you into this, because throughout your career, you have had an unusual insight into the wealth, into the finances, into the mindset of African-American investors, all investors, but African-American investors in particular. It's something that you've really cared about, and we've worked together on over the years. How does the systemic barriers to developing wealth affected Black families in the country, and what does that mean for the pipeline?
Well, there's so much to that answer. I'll try to hit it really quickly.
because I know we don't have a lot of time. I actually wrote an article about this that's about to be published in Black Enterprise, where I talked about not just the obvious things that people think of when they think of racial barriers. I tried to show some of the economic ones that turn into being socioeconomic. So we know that there's this wage gap, and this wage gap is deteriorating. It's not getting better for us, it's getting worse. So the average black woman 30 years ago, made 92 cents for every dollar that a white woman made. Now it's 60 cents. We've literally gone the other way. When I give this statistic, it shocks people, but a high school educated white male is going to have a higher net worth than a black educated college graduate in America. And when you give these kind of statistics, you show this is just not about education, it's just not about opportunity. There's some systemic issues here that are causing us to go way backwards. Obviously, we know things like unemployment rates and things like that, but it really is about this issue of opportunity and where this opportunity really does get stalled. And it gets stalled for us so much earlier than people would ever imagine. Right. The other thing that's really interesting is very recently there was a survey done about perceptions of white Americans about black achievement. And white Americans overestimate black achievement. We believe that we've gotten a lot, there's a widespread belief that the black community is a lot further than we actually are, and particularly more educated African Americans. And yet, again, one last statistic, the New York Times just published this story that there is no change in African Americans going to the top 100 elite schools in this country, including Ivy Leagues. There's no change in our numbers since 1980. Oh. We have not gained in any way. The numbers are exactly the same. So I know that sounds like a list of horribles that I've sort of spouted out, but it does talk about this is more than an issue of culture. It's more than an issue of rising up an organization. Right. There are systemic issues here that have caused us to not be in the same place as our white counterparts. And we have to acknowledge that and decide we are going to stop admiring this problem. Right. We're going to actually do something about it.
Right. Right, and you think about your average 45-year-old mid-level executive who would ordinarily be on an executive C-suite kind of track. She is worried about, she's just given her 15-year-old son the talk. Mm-hmm. She's worried about him. She's had a series of microaggressions at the barbecue over the weekend in Montclair or wherever she may live, and she comes into the office on Monday, and somebody says something about her hair. Now, this sounds petty and strange, but if she is the only person in her family that is experiencing this kind of success, and she's worried about extended people, these are the kinds of small cultural issues that really provide huge barriers to people feeling comfortable and welcome.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because the number of times I've walked in a room and I'm the only black person in a suite of 100. Or one of 3 females. You talk about a male-dominated industry, try the home improvement industry, right? And so you walk in, and I have a very diverse group of friends, and you have to have those open conversations. And I will challenge this room, to be honest, right? If you look outside of your workplace, how many of your friends are diverse? Because inclusion is not just a professional thing, it's a me thing. And I can have conversations with my friends and talk about my 2 young boys. Right. And my son that got stopped for no reason at all because he's driving a Lexus, right? And have those conversations about how we view things a little bit differently. And I think once you have that open conversation within the workplace, it changes the mindset or the biases or the stereotype. And we have to recognize it's going to take time. Right. And we're not moving fast enough, but it's upon ourselves, as we talked about here, to not only help shape the culture, not only provide the opportunity, but we also have to provide the education, the things that are systemically holding us back. And I think this is a conversation worth having, and it's great that we're having this on the stage at Fortune.
Oh, I appreciate that too. Anybody want to? Yes, hello.
Thank you so much for talking.
Here comes the mic. Say your name, say your name.
Cheryl Palmer, I'm CEO of Taylor Morrison, a home builder, and so I'm particularly interested in your last comment around how many times you've walked in the room and you're one of 1 or one of 3. I've experienced something very similar. But when we talk about something that's systematic, I'd be really anxious to get your guys' feedback on, we have to have participants in the room to develop. And the challenge, I have a corporate office in Phoenix, Arizona, where the population is, less than 2%. How do we attract and help from a corporate America standpoint to help the systematic problem? Because I am all ears.
So one, I believe very strongly people will move for a good job and a good culture. That is just like the biggest misperception out there, that you can't really recruit because the local community isn't there. If you're known to be a great employer, people are going to go where there's opportunity. The second thing is that I believe that the #1 beneficiary, and I say this without this being a zero-sum game, but it being a fact, of diversity efforts in America have been white women. White women have benefited. So when you read annual reports and read all these pages about diversity and things like that, and I challenge you all because I do it all the time to see how many pages are devoted to it, and then you look at the executive ranks of those organizations, you'll see at least more white women than you will see people of color. So as an organization, people have to decide they're going to do something differently. The other thing that bothers me, and I have to say this, it's not with anger or with any kind of anxiety, it's just disappointing, is that we are working on this. And we don't work on anything else that matters in our companies. You either do or you do not. As my husband wrote for Yoda, there is no try. You do not work on better earnings.
That's right.
You do not work on having a product that's better. If it's not good enough, customers aren't going to buy it. But for some reason, we've all been allowed to get in this conversation of working on diversity. And at some point, we have to put literally a stake in the ground. Last point, my favorite story is a CEO told me that he had an open position for comms in his organization, and he had no people of color in the executive ranks. So he went to the executive recruiter and he said, I want a diverse slate. The executive recruiter came back and said, we couldn't find anyone. So he told his entire senior team, got it, there's no one. So what we're gonna do is we're not gonna fill the job. So we're not going to have a head of comms inside of this publicly traded company. The general counsel, the CFO, panic. Like, we can't run a public company without a head of communications. Suddenly, there was a diverse slate.
Yep.
And he became hardcore about it, saying, we're just not going to proceed. So when I hear the working on or people want move, I can just tell you that if there is an opportunity, smart, thoughtful people are going to go.
I'm scanning.
Yes.
I'm scanning. Anybody? Anybody else?
I think just to add to that point as well. Oh,
Sorry.
Nope. Question.
I don't know that I have a question, but you said something that triggered an experience when you talked about your son being stopped. I have 3 boys, 2 are older, and 1 is 15, so we went on vacation. We invited one of his friends, mostly so he wouldn't bother us because he was bored. And the friend he chose is this African-American boy whose father is a partner at a very well-known firm. He goes to private schools, and we went to the Caribbean. And I could tell something was unsettling for him. And at the end of the vacation, we went around and said, okay, so, we do stuff like that. What was this vacation for you? What did it mean? Oh, he just rocked my world. He said, it was the first time I was somewhere where I wasn't afraid of being black.
Mm-hmm.
He said, my parents always lecture us to not wear hoodies and to not get certain haircuts.
Right.
I was just so moved by, I could tell he was unsettled on the whole trip, what that experience must have been like. And I think it's something that we've talked a lot about empathy, pardon my emotions. We've talked a lot about empathy in this conference, but I don't think until we can get that boy's experience, we can get what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful point.
Thasunda, take us home.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Yeah, take us home. We're not a
Okay,
business
I'll take
case.
you
Tell
home.
your thing. Say your thing.
Just a couple of things. One, that is our plight.
Right.
And I can live in Greenwich, Connecticut and be a CEO and wear whatever, but at the end of the day, I'll have a driver, won't tell you the company, who asked me when he picked me up from my home, so you work for this family. And so I think we got to get past, look the part, talk the part, have the credentials. At the end of the day, I think as black women, we weep just like the young mother who has her son shot for wearing a hoodie. And so I think what we need from all of you is that we have to all commit that this is a sisterhood, because the reality is there's not enough of us sitting out there, and so we need you. We need the sisterhood. And I think I think we have to walk away from this conference, like Mellody said, and decide that diversity is not a business case. It is what we are, it is who we are, and it's what we're going to get done. And I think if we can join forces, you know, we can make sure that we reach as we climb, and that you can pick up that young black girl and let her know there's 3 women from another company that looks like her that can ascend, and in the meantime, you'll stand in the gap. And so I think that's what we need in order to make, you know, corporate America a little bit more browner and a little bit more female.
That's perfect.
I always challenge the people in my life with one very specific point. We know a lot more about you than you know about us.
That's right.
Yes.
And so if you make that investment in knowing as much about us as we know about you, I promise you, we know a lot more.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I will challenge, as I mentioned, everyone in this room, just find a friend that may not be of your race.
Right.
And just have a conversation. And the more we understand where everyone is coming from, I think we all move in a better place. And as you mentioned, there's just not enough of women to begin with. And then from a diversity standpoint, not enough black women or Hispanic women in leadership roles. And it must change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.